Welcome everyone to the Future Trends Forum. I'm delighted that you all could make it. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm going to be your chief organizer, cat herder, and MC for the hour. We're delighted to see all of you here. Just a couple of introductory notes. First, this is a spin-off of the Future Trends in Technology and Education monthly report. It's an environmental scan which takes a look at major trends impacting technology and education. It's been running for several years, so we have a pretty good amount of longitudinal data now. If you're new to it, go to ftte.us and take a look at some of the sample reports and join us. FTTE is the hashtag for our event today. Now, we couldn't do what we're doing without the generous help of a couple of sponsors. So to begin with, we want to thank NYSERNet from New York State, a wonderful group who does great work for networking education in that state. We thank them very much for their contribution. And we also want to thank Shindig because they contribute to us very strongly. As you can see, first, they've let us use their technology, their awesome video conferencing tool, which we're using right now. But they also, behind the scenes, have a wonderful team of staff who are very, very helpful at making sure everything works. So we thank Shindig very, very much. Couldn't do it without you. Now, to get you thinking about today, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest. But before we talk about him, let me just introduce one thing about where you are if you haven't been here before. So this is the Shindig video conferencing environment. Now, up where I am, and where you can see a slide is here, this is called the stage. This is where presenters are and where you can be. I'll explain that in a second. The very bottom half, where all of you guys are, is the audience chamber. This is where every participant gets to be. And you can see people either have a photo, an image, or a video feed. And as you watch during the next hour, you'll see those people move back and forth as they get to connect. Now, there are a lot of ways to interact. I mean, you could right now sit back, listen, and watch, and you'll get the whole hour of conversation, which is great. But it's even better if you get to participate. And there are 4 ways of doing this. So first, if you mouse over your own picture or your own cursor, your own video feed, you'll see there's a little button for I Am Chat. Click that, and up will pop a chat box where you can have conversations with the nearest 16 or so people in your room. There's 2 more. The very, very bottom right of the screen are 2 orange dots. One of them has a raised hand and the word raise. If you click that, that tells us that you would like to go up on stage. So click that if you've got a comment to make or a question to ask, and if your mic is working and your video camera is on. If all those conditions are met, please click raise and come on up. This happens every week and we love it. Now, the other way you can contribute is by clicking the Ask button. So that's if you feel too shy, or if your technology doesn't work, or if you're in a public place or whatever, but you can type in a comment, and that'll come up. We'll get it displayed for everyone to see, and I'll read it out loud so you can interact that way. And if that's not enough, over on Twitter, we have the hashtag FTTE. So tweet at that, and we'll have a conversation going. Now, I said we will have a conversation going, but it's already beginning to rock. So it's really, really beginning to happen. So now, let me introduce our main guest. This is Perry Samson. He's a professor at the University of Michigan. And you may know him for a few reasons. One is he's the architect of the terrific weather site, Wonderground, Weather Underground. And if you don't know that, it's a distributed, kind of crowdsourced meteorological news site, a wonderful alternative to weather.com. And it's one that lets you, if you like, contribute by supplying data to their weather gathering information. So that's one. But the other is that Perry's been doing some very, very innovative work with student data in his classroom and in his classes, which I think breaks a lot of new ground and has powerful implications for those of us thinking about the intersection of education and technology. So Shindig team, why don't you bring Perry up on stage? Hello, Perry. Welcome back.
How are you doing, Brian?
Oh, good to see you. How's everything in Ann Arbor?
Well, it's been muggy here, and I'm looking at it seems like it's muggy in half the country right now, so I can't complain.
Well, you would know better than most people. Well, let me ask, to begin with, what's your current role with the Wonderground project? Are you still working on that, or is that self-sustaining?
Well, the Underground project was, many of the projects I'm going to talk to you today about happened because I'm a lazy man. And I wanted to be able to get weather information for a class at 9 in the morning. And one of my students, Jeff Masters, created this is back before the internet, people. This is back when there was simply a telnet session, and he was able to build a telnet session so that we could pull up any city and get weather information. My gosh, we had as many as 50 people a week using that system. Then Hurricane Bob happened on the East Coast, and we jumped to 50,000 users that week, and thought, my gosh, this network thing could be big someday. So one thing led to another. Another student, Alan Sternberg, came along and made a Gopher client, if you remember Gopher clients, which was made interactive weather maps for the first time. And he graduated and went on to Stanford, and he and his roommates working on websites. Alan created the Weather Underground. His roommate, Larry Page, made something else, but wound up both being successful. So it's all about finding a need and then having some gifted students around to help you do it.
And I heard that Larry Page guy went on to do some things.
He did all right.
Well, I think using laziness is a great spur for innovation. That's fantastic. Well, it sounds like what your current project is not based too much on sloth, but more on energy. Why don't you sketch this out for the Future Transform folk? What are you doing in your classroom with gathering student data? How does that work?
Well, I'm curious how many people here are actually instructors. Can you raise your hand so I can see how many of you are instructors? Anybody? I got a few of you.
Sure.
Well, instructors, you probably appreciate that.
Yeah.
What your goal is to get students to engage in your material. And I tried using clickers in the class, and I found, first of all, that students never use the word clicker in a sentence without the word lame attached. So, and second, the kinds of questions I wanted to ask required more than the simple A, B, C answers that were allowed in the systems I had back then. So I started creating a simple system so they could answer questions related to images. I'm a meteorologist. I could ask about weather maps, and the students could put a dot on the map, and I could show that in the front of the room, and we could interact. Then things got out of control, where once again, in my attempt to try to engage the students, they kept coming up with more ideas for what they wanted to have in the classroom, and I'm not that good a programmer, but I can program enough that I could show, here's what I think they want, and then pass it on to people who actually knew how to program. I have some excellent people who helped me build a system called Lecture Tools. And the whole emphasis of this is first of all sharing. You're sharing your slides and videos and such with the students, but more importantly, you're giving them opportunities to participate that they might not have had before. I'll talk about this as time goes on, but basically they can now have your notes, they can take notes, their notes are synchronized to the slides when you took them, they can answer my questions, they can ask me questions, and in a button that I just love, I call it the WTF button, they can even indicate when they're confused. And then they know they're confused, and I have a meter in front of the room showing me how many students are confused. And it just, oh my gosh, it just has changed my course immensely, so that I have a great deal more interaction with the students who seem to appreciate having the opportunity to participate.
Perry, how big were these classes?
Yeah, well, the classes, another long story short, is I was asked to teach the introductory course in our department, and it was called Weather and Climate, and it had about 40 students in it. And my chairman said, well, not only should you teach it, but is there some way to get more students into the class? So I redid the curriculum some, and here's a hint to anybody who's teaching, as I put the word extreme in front of it. I said, let's change it from weather and climate to extreme weather. And now I have 250 students in the class. So a philosophy or dentistry, put extreme in front of it, and you're bound to increase the number of students. So
I should have done that for my 18th century literature class.
yes. Well, imagine you're standing in front of whatever number of students, you still are trying to understand what they do and don't understand. And more importantly, think about metacognition. You want them to understand what they don't understand. And the really only way to do that is to quiz them, to ask them questions and get their responses. And you can't let them hide. If you just have them raise their hand, many students are not going to raise their hand because they're fearful they're going to look stupid in front of the others in the class. So part of what the students asked for is a way that they could vote and be recognized. So I would know they voted, but the other students wouldn't know how they voted. Also, the students would be able to ask questions during class. So the system we built, the students can pose questions, and I or my teaching assistant, if I have one, answer the questions. But everyone sees all the questions, you see all the answers, but the students don't see who asked the question. And I always know who asked the question, but the students don't know. And this has changed, again, my class in ways I hadn't anticipated. Now, again, all the instructors in the room here, you go up, if you complete a little bit of a segment of your class, and you go, any questions?
And worst thing you could say.
That's the crickets.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So the beauty of this is what I found this past semester is that when I can allow them to ask the questions digitally and anonymously, the number of questions I got submitted last semester was 416. Now this is very sobering because I've been teaching, this is the start of my 38th year here at the University of Michigan. It means for the previous 36 years or so, every time I got done with class and said any questions and there was no response, I just assumed I had done such a good job that everybody got everything and did a little victory dance in front of the room and put the chalk down. Thought I had nailed it. The reality is I've been confusing for the past 36 years and didn't know it. The fact that the students can now pose these questions and get responses and participate, and they can answer each other's questions, or I can answer the questions, but the students can ask the questions when they have it, has turned out to dramatically change the amount of engagement in the classroom. You're giving them the opportunity to participate.
This is Lecture Tools?
Well, Lecture Tools then was acquired by a company called Echo 360, and Echo 360 has continued this with a program called the Active Learning Platform. And that's what I use now. And there, it's even better that my gosh, it brings in lecture capture, and lecture capture is linked to the notes, and it's just such an integrated system. But not only can the students answer the questions, I asked the students on the first day of class, how comfortable are you answering a question verbally? How comfortable are you asking a question verbally in class? And it's probably not going to surprise you, but only about half the male students were comfortable. And what's going to surprise you maybe less is that less than a quarter of the female students were comfortable. So if I just taught in the traditional way, as I had for the previous 30-odd years, I've created an uneven playing field where not everyone's willing to participate at the same level. But when you add the technology, now not only are there so many more questions coming in, 400 and some odd questions, but it turns out the female students are asking more questions per capita than the male students. Students for whom English is not the native language are asking as many questions as the rest of the students in class, and for me, this is a victory. Suddenly, everyone can participate, and my gosh, they are. They're asking some really dumb questions, and that's great, because you want them to ask those questions. You want them to feel like they can participate. And you may well point out to me that students should be willing to raise their hand and ask a question verbally. That's part of maturation. But I'm going to argue that when you're a freshman in college, and I was a first-year student. A first-generation student coming from northern Appalachia. And when I went to college, there was no way in hell I was going to speak up and ask a question in class because I didn't feel like I even belonged in that school. So by allowing them to ask these questions in an anonymous way, my hope is that they're going to see that their questions are no dumber than anyone else's question, and that they can empower themselves in the years to come to be willing to raise their hand when they get to their sophomore and junior year. But initially, at least, you have to provide them the opportunity to see that they belong to be there.
That's fantastic, Perry. Now, is this just you right now who is using this, or is this something that Michigan has managed to roll out at a larger level?
Well, it's rolled out here at Michigan, and there's some 70 classes using it here at the university last semester. Echo 360 offers this, and so it's being used now worldwide. And I can't remember, some number of 3 million students have access to the system worldwide. A great deal of use in Australia and New Zealand, and as well as in the United States. So we're excited about that. And perhaps, and I did this simply because I wanted my students to be more engaged. I wanted to be able to interact with them more. And my gosh, it's given me more tools. So as another example, again, bear with me because I'm a meteorologist. So I would show them an image of a map of every hurricane and typhoon and cyclone that's ever been on a screen. I say, well, what part of this image doesn't make sense to you? And what I can do is click a button that requires that they not only put a dot on the image, but they have to tell me why they chose that dot. And now class is way fun for me because now I've got this map of dots on it. I can roll over any dot and I can see their logic for why they chose that spot. And that it just changes the class because now it's a conversation now. So it's not just me talking about how things work. But in fact, their inquiry-based questions allow me then to go on and talk about why are things the way they are in that part of the world. And it just made class a great deal more interesting for me, and as well as I hope the students. So likewise with multiple choice questions, it's interesting to see the A, B, C answers, yes, but it's more interesting to see why they chose A, B, or C. And you can click on the letter C, and it'll show you the justifications for the kids that chose C. So it's just given me more tools for the classroom to allow, I guess, more reflection and discussion during class.
Perry, I've got a couple of questions, but more importantly, we have a couple of questions from the audience. Kelly Walsh has his or her hand up. I think it's him. Shindig folks, why don't you bring Kelly up on stage?
Hey, Brian and Perry. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you well, Kelly.
All right, great. Perry, I love what you've done with lecture tools. I saw you demo it at either Campus Tech or UB Tech years ago. Very practical question. Under Echo 360, is there a free trial, or what's the entry point for educators to get in and try this out?
Tell you what, I don't know. I should know, but don't know the answer to that. But if you email me, I will be, anybody, by the way, email me, and I will be sure to get that information and let you know. My email is quite simple. It's Samson, S-A-M-S-O-N, at umich.edu. I will be sure to contact them. And if there isn't a free trial, I'll do everything in my power to make sure there is. I would love to see this used and tried more places.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Kelly. That was a very, very practical and useful question. And if you're new to the Future Transform, or if you're new to the Shindig, that's an example of one way to participate. So if you've got a question or a comment like that, just click the raise hand button and we'll haul you up on stage. I can't guarantee that anybody up will have as much hair as I do, but still they'll have better questions and more of them. Perry, one question I had was to wonder, what you're describing is, in a sense, a successor to clickers. You have the clicker idea of having students have access to digital tools that they can use to interact with you and the content in the class. And this seems to work fantastically. What are some of the implications of this for teaching and learning in general? That is this something that you would recommend for more people in the higher ed to use, or where do you see this going next?
Well, I would recommend it for at least higher ed. I can't say I know anything about the K-12 world, so to what degree be of value there or not. So I won't even try. Maybe somebody can jump in here with their opinions. But we've been using it in the higher ed world, and regardless of whether you use the system I've described, or clickers or whatever, for God's sake, try something. I mean, get into the classroom and ask your students if they understand the material, and ask them questions that are germane to the things you might put on a test, as an opportunity to have that turn class more into conversation. The whole goal here is what we like to call active learning. You want to offload the responsibility of learning to the learner. It's not just you pouring good knowledge into them and they're going to just fill up with this knowledge. They have to construct their own knowledge, and the way to do that is by actively participating. I always like to say that science is a contact sport. Yeah, you can read a book, but you really need to go out. I take some students out every May, and we chase tornadoes. And you may remember the TV show Wild Kingdom, and I think Marlon Perkins was the head of that. I'm sort of the Marlon Perkins, and Marlon Perkins would go, well, I'll sit in the van while Jim goes wrestle the alligator. Well, I'm the guy who sits in the van and sends the students to drive as close to the tornado as possible to collect data so I can write a paper. But the students love it. I mean, anytime you can have the students actively do, whether it's science or literature or what, if they're actively involved in that, they're bound to learn more. And there's papers out there. One paper by Scott Freeman at the University of Washington, in the Proceedings of the National Academy, showed that out of hundreds of studies, if you had a more active learning approach in your classroom, the student's average grade goes up by half a letter grade. So there's literature that supports this concept of offloading, not just the get off the stage. I've got a website called sageonstage.com. It's tongue in cheek, but it's, our job is to get off stop being the sage and stop worrying about how a presentation is going. Start thinking about how can you offload the responsibility to the students. Oh, and
it sounds. Please.
Brian, just reminds me, because what you're saying leads into the bigger part of what I wanted to talk about. And so this whole system was built so it made my students more engaged. And there's far more interaction going on in the classroom. And what I only realized this past year is that the system collects data on everything the students are doing. How many notes are they taking? How often they come to class? How many slides do they look at? What's the time change between when I change a slide and the student changes slides? There's just so much information I have about how students behave. And lo and behold, this summer we've discovered, looking at the data from number of classes, that we can now predict who's going to fail the course in week 2. That is, we can predict based only on student behavior who's going to fail the course. So this is quite exciting because many of the early warning systems are based on how you do on the first exam. And that's too late. My hope is we could try to build a warning system which will allow us to see who's in trouble early in the semester. Now, what we do, if I know Johnny is in trouble in class, I've got to figure out what to do with that student. So I'm trying to work with the advisors on campus to help me build some new interventions so that I might reach out and change that student's behavior before it gets too far into the semester.
This is huge, Perry. This is, I think, revolutionary in a lot of ways. And so people are going to have a bunch of questions. And right now, Brittany has one. Brittany, why don't you lead off? Why don't you take my spot?
Hi. So
Brittany.
how are you? My question was related to the structure of your lectures and how they've changed based on your use of this software. So do you structure your lecture differently than you did previous to using this?
I do, and it's a great question. It does, and this is one of the issues I have. Trying to get my peers to try new things in the classroom is probably the hardest challenge I've got. Maybe you appreciate that. Because it's like we're all the chefs, and we all know how to cook a lasagna, so we're not going to, I show you my recipe, you may or may not want it. Likewise, in the classroom, this is such, like almost personal space. It's difficult to get my colleagues to think about change. In my own class, it fundamentally changed the way I teach I think, an important way. First, in the past, I think I was a pretty good lecturer. I can lecture till you're blue in the face, anything you want to know about meteorology. But that's not necessarily the way students learn best. So for me, it was thinking about what is the best way for a student to learn, and what's my role in that. And what I've learned, I think, with this tool is that let me step back for a minute and tell you where this came from. I went on sabbatical a few years ago, and I was blessed to go on sabbatical with a fellow named. I was blessed to go on sabbatical with a fellow. He had won the Nobel Prize in physics, and now he's turning his attention to science education. And he would assemble a group of scientists to read the education literature. And I have to be honest with you, education literature is a hard read for me because it's not a language that I'm comfortable with, just as I'm sure meteorology wouldn't be a comfortable language for others. But we read it as a group, and then it was sort of like we were trying to come up with lessons. We would try to restate what the article was about in terms that a scientist could understand. So for the educationally impaired, basically, a translation. And from that, then I'd paddle back to my office, and this is with Carl Wyman, and just start programming what I think I just understood from that discussion. So much of what is in the system, it grows from what's in the educational literature as translated by a scientist. And for me, I learned a lot about how it is that I should be leading the class, and what I could do to make that class more effective for my students. And a lot of it had to do with how do you offer students opportunities to participate? How do you bring active learning to the classroom? So from that, writing this technology in a way was my way of expressing what I was learning. So some people might, write a report after they've learned something. I write software, and this is my attempt to put into code what I think has been learned in the educational literature. So it changed the way I teach because I learned from that literature how I should be teaching, and then was able to express that through the software.
Thank you, Perry.
You're welcome.
That's a really good question, Brittany. And that gets back at some things that we've seen from other technologies, like MOOCs and the domain of one's own, the idea that the more you teach digitally, the more you take seriously the affordances of digital technology for learning, the more that changes how you normally do things. That's a really, really good question. Perry, one thing I'm going to ask you, can you just unfold it a little bit more about the failure prediction rate? What are some of the data points that go into that?
Well, here, what we did is, and again, remember, please understand, I don't do a squat. I just kind of sit in the van. But I had some students this summer, and what we did is we ingested all the data from our LMS. And here at the university, we use Canvas at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Everything the students are doing in Canvas, everything the students are doing in Echo 360, how they'd answered various surveys from SurveyMonkey and Google Forms, and all the data from the student information system about the student's background, and put it into one massive system remove the student's identity so that the data wasn't being, no one could identify who Johnny was. And then ran large statistical models on that to see what was it of all the things the students do, what is it that affects their grades? And what we discovered was that it's basically the behaviors, certain behaviors in class. One of them is how many slides do they view during class time. So if I show 30 slides and they only look at 10 of them, that's a low number. Another one which is very important is when I pose a question in class, first of all, do they answer the question? So that's a form of participation, obviously. Attendance was not important, I should point out, but participation in the questions was. And even more important was, and this is one of these discoveries, but if I pose a question in class and they get it right, they're likely to do well in the exam. Duh.
Yeah. Shock.
Okay. So right away, if you just take those features of their behavior, you can quickly build a multiple regression model, and from it discover that you can pick a grade. Say, I'm going to identify any student. I'm going to predict who will get less than 70 on the first exam, and you can do that with about 80% accuracy.
80%.
80% accuracy. So, and we tried this in 5 courses here at the university, and the same model worked well in all the courses. So it's too early to declare victory. It also raises some very interesting questions, because what if the day comes where we could predict who's going to fail by week 2 with high accuracy? At what point do I become liable if I don't do anything?
Yes.
And more importantly, I'm trained as a meteorologist, not necessarily in the arts of learning. So who designs the interventions? What should I do if I know Johnny's in trouble? And what's going to be most effective in changing their behavior? What's my responsibility? What's the advisor's responsibility in that world? So
do you have any? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just to follow that. What the University of Michigan is now ingesting this data and building a new interface, so at least the advisors would be aware that Johnny is attending class, is answering questions, are they writing notes, and we'll show them, oh, Johnny's written this many notes, and here's the distribution of all the other students in the class, so that when they sit down with a student, at least they can talk about, well, it looks like you're not writing any notes, and maybe there's a good reason for that, but it gives the advisor more information to work with. So it's all about just arming myself as an instructor and the advisors with enough data so they can take action.
This is the time in the Future Trends Forum when we mingle. That is where you and I climb off the stage. So we stop being your sage on the stage, and we mingle with the crowd. And we do that by following a question I'm going to ask. But I have a simple question I just need to ask really quickly. What do you call this new project of yours?
The data project?
Yeah.
Well, it's we have a new project here at the university called MIDAS, which is the Michigan Data Analytics something or other. I'm sorry, I don't know the acronym. So we're doing that under the guise of this new. The university is very interested in data science, and learning analytics is part of that data science initiative. So it hasn't got a specific name. All this is a partnership between the university and Echo 360, thinking about what are the dashboards that advisors and instructors will need in the future.
That answers my question, and I think I see a naming opportunity in your future. But let me ask everyone, all the participants right now in the forum, I want you to think about your own institution, where you teach, where you work, and possibly the institutions that you're connected with through family or your own past. For example, full disclosure, I'm a University of Michigan alum 3 times over. And think about Yeah, think about how the this form of Midas, of what Perry is doing with that. How would this play out at your institution? I mean, think, are you doing something like this now? Could you be doing something like this in the next year? And if so, how would that change teaching, learning, advising, student life? So let's take 5 minutes, think about Midas at your place, and we'll regroup back here and share what we've learned. So Shindig folks, if you could pull Perry and I down to the crowd, we can start mingling. Well, welcome back, folks. We had a really good discussion. Welcome back, Perry. So, what did you find in your conversation with the various Future Trends forum books?
Well, I had some excellent conversations. One was about tornado chasing, which I love to talk about. And others were just sort of brainstorming about the understanding, obviously, is that we're just at the introduction to what's going to be possible with learning analytics, with the kinds of data we're collecting. And the real challenge for us all is the day is going to come where we know everything the students are doing. Now what do we do? How does that help us? How can it help the students? And it's a time to think about what should we know and what don't we know. Another part, just a moment here, just to share with you, is one of the questions I ask the students every day is simply, how do you feel? And there's a graph where they have to put a dot on the map. It says on the x-axis, how do you feel physically? And the y-axis is, how do you feel emotionally? And the students put a dot on that map every day. And I mine that over the course of the year. And there is, I found, no relationship between their physical well-being and the grades they get. The only relationship I could find was between their physical well-being was the minimum temperature in Ann Arbor. The colder it gets here, as you may well remember, Brian, the worse people feel. But their emotional well-being is correlated with grades. Now, I don't think I want to be asking students about their emotional state every day. I'm not sure that's appropriate. On the other hand, clearly there's a relationship, and what should we know? How should we get that? And at what point are we becoming creepy? So there's some interesting research to be done there about mining students' state of mind. Because obviously the things that affect learning are more than just the books and the content. Other things are happening in your life. There are crises in your life. There are extra jobs you're working. And we as faculty generally don't know that. So should we? And how do we find that out? And how do we help the students with that?
Well, in the discussion that I just had, we had a grad student from George Mason University named Jamie. I didn't get his last name, but Jamie mentioned that he works partly as a grad student, but partly in the student life. And this is partly where student life comes in, where student life gets to take a look at things that faculty don't get to see. So they look at student interaction with extracurricular events, student interaction with residence halls, dorms, that kind of thing. So maybe one way going forward would be increased partnership between faculty and student life. Jamie, this is me making sure you have a good job in just a few years.
I think there's plenty of opportunities for us to learn a lot there.
I think so. I think so. Let me just say quickly, we have 10 minutes left. So if you have any questions that came up in your conversation or any other questions that occur to you, this is a great time to raise your hand or type in the ask button or fire up on Twitter or chat with your colleagues. We had one other comment that came up, and this is from the University of Arizona person, Brittany, who asked a question earlier. And what she wanted to know was, how does what you're describing change when the class is entirely online? How do you get that kind of participation going when you don't have the face-to-face class?
Yeah, I'm not a good person to answer that question because I haven't had that experience of teaching an online class. We have enough problems with the face-to-face version of getting attention, getting engagement. I suspect that the same rules apply, though. That somehow what you want to do is you want the students to be doing, not just listening to tape or watching a PowerPoint presentation, but you want to be challenging them with activities so they can walk away feeling that they actually could replicate or do something in whatever discipline you're teaching. And I've not taken an online class. I presume that's the kind of things that are going on, and Arizona certainly is a leader role in that area. So I'm here to learn from others about what possibilities there are there.
Well, we talked a little bit about MOOCs and how many MOOCs are non-interactive, or the interaction is very limited. It's limited to quizzes, for example. I'm taking a Spanish 101 MOOC right now from Britain, and all the exercises are basically self-creating. You know, spell this word correctly, identify this vocabulary, and that's fine. I mean, that's making some progress. But instead, we have some of the MOOCs that are unusual, like the first MOOC, Connectivism, or the DS-106 MOOC, which use social software to ground all the discussion, and that became kind of the heart and soul of the class. So it may be that that's one way to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Brian, one other thing I would like to share.
Please.
Because I've got yet a new technology that I'm just rolling out here this year. I'm part of a NASA grant. We're going to be launching 8 satellites in November to study the winds inside hurricanes in higher resolution. And as fumes from that project, they developed a new technology that I can pin on a student. And now indoors, I can locate that student down to the centimeter. And what this means potentially is that I can have each student in, say, half a gymnasium become active players in a complex model. Or I could have the students go and maybe explore the weather across the country by walking around and viewing weather, virtual traveling around an area, archaeological study or weather study or whatever. The whole idea here is to get students again out of their seats and moving about. So in my case, instead of lecturing about hurricanes, I might give each student a value of atmospheric pressure and then say, all right, go make one. And they have to stand up and walk around the room. And wind is a function of how much pressure changes from one spot to another. So if my pressure is different than Brian's pressure, then there'll be a strong wind between us. And you actually see that on the screen as you walk around. You'd see where people are located and what wind you're producing by your relative location to one another. And if you then work together, you figure out how you need to orient yourselves in order to create, let's say, a low pressure system. And then I say, okay, well, now make it a Category 5 hurricane. And what would you have to do to make that happen? So this idea of having students, and whether this happens in K-12 and the students are paintbrushes and they're walking around creating a drawing, but the whole idea is with this sort of resolution, it should be possible in the future for students to actively participate in construction of their own knowledge by becoming a hurricane or by making a painting as a group. And this has got you'll like this acronym, Brian. This is the Wireless Indoor Location Device Learning System, or the WILD Learning System. The whole concept, again, is think about activities where you're trying to teach maybe a complex concept, but it's easier for the students just to become that complex system and learn by seeing how spread of disease, for example. So everybody's walking around and you interact with somebody, and maybe you may or may not spread the disease, and you go talk to somebody else, you may or may not spread the disease, and on the screen you'd see how the disease is being spread through these interactions. So this excites me as yet another way to make my class more interesting. And I'm thinking it probably has value to others as well. So there again, a new technology that I hope will be available sometime next year that holds promise for how to improve engagement.
We'll be tracking that, and would love to have you come back to see how wild it develops. I'm thinking now of using this as a simulation exercise for political science or history, where you have 100 people simulating a mob in the French Revolution or something. But before I go on, we have Kisa Johnson with a question. Zach, why don't you bring Kisa up on stage?
Hi, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Hi, Kisa.
Can you hear me well?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I was so, you know what? I've learned so much just from hearing from you, like your journey, your story about how you kind of went through some self-actualization, kind of say, wait a minute, how can I create a better learning environment for my students? And what I see is that you're a learner yourself, so you infuse that vigor into your classroom, and I'm so happy to see that. Like, I was having already a great day, but this was like even better just to hear your journey and your story.
You're making
on
my
how,
day, Keisha.
yeah, like how you're learning. Like, to me, a good teacher is a learner themselves, and they're not afraid to do it. And I just think it's beautiful. Just keep doing what you're doing. I just want to give you some kudos.
Thank you so much. Holy cow. I want that taped, Brian.
I'm done, Brian.
It is taped, so you'll have that for posterity.
I'll send it to my dean.
Absolutely, absolutely. Your dean is probably terrified of you at this point. I agree with Kisa. You've been doing this for more than a generation, Perry, and the excitement that comes off of you like a glow is just, it really inspires me. And I'm a humanist, so.
Come back to school, Brian.
I would for you. I do have, I want to come back to something you said back about your Midas implementation. One of the questions you're thinking about is, as an instructor, you say, at what point do I become liable if I don't do anything? And I'm curious if I can make this a broader question for a university, big one like Michigan, or for higher ed in general. Since we know this technology is there, we know that you've tested it, we know that it works. I mean, it's still early, but we can have this. At what point do we become liable if we don't use this technology? At one point, would it be even educational malpractice not to use it?
Wow, that's a big question. Unfortunately, I'm not even going to try to answer it. But it does, I would argue my understanding would be that if we really could do what I'm talking about, if we really could predict who's going to fail by week 2, to hell with what the university or colleges think, the value to the student is immense, because there are students who we can't retain, often because we don't understand what they're going through or what they're actually doing for class, and we don't know anything about their other physical emotional state, for example. As we're able to uncover this and get better information, data, and predictive schemes, I would imagine that schools would volunteer and be the first in line. If you could retain an extra 2% of the students, most colleges would jump at that in a heartbeat. So
yes.
My hope is that through what many schools are using lecture capture, and I'm saying, well, why just capture the video? Let's capture the entire learning. I prefer to call what we're doing learning capture. And we're just trying to capture all the data and then work with the students. Another technology that I didn't talk about much here today was the fact that students are taking notes in the system. So this summer I had a couple of excellent, bright graduate students build a whole new system that sniffs the students' notes in real time as they're writing it and creates a new column, which is basically what's trending in class. And you'd see then the notes that are trending in class. And those notes are then can be automatically linked to other resources, Wikipedia, your textbook, the video, lecture capture. We're just beginning to scratch the surface for how do we provide a better better learning platform something even beyond the LMS, something that's going to be, I think, more valuable for the student in the long run.
Imagine if you could create a regularly updated word cloud of all those notes. I didn't mean the meteorological pun, sorry.
It's already
But, you know,
running.
say every...
Running class this semester.
Great, I would love to see some of those.
Oh, wow. So will the students. It's
I'm sure.
It's a work in progress. And what this is, again, what I love about working at the university is I get these half-baked ideas. I can build them and try them out. And my poor students are the guinea pigs, and they have to suffer through the trials. But they become then, they give me all the feedback about what they like and don't like. But having said that, I've only tried it so far here at the University of Michigan. So I would love to get more classes involved in these experiments, and I'd like to get a wider distribution of student types and school types involved here. So if you, as an instructor, want to try this, email me again here. I realized I had to write it backwards, so here's my attempt to do my. I don't know if you can read that. Is that backwards now, or is it just stupid? Hold on. Maybe
See through it?
Samson at UMich ID. If you want to play along at home.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Play along.
That's fine. I think we've got it. Perry, we're out of time. I have to release you back to your data gathering, teaching, and storm chasing. Let me thank you so much. This has been just exciting to hear about. Both your own passion for learning, your creativity, and just how far forward we've come. You're blazing some seriously new trails, and I think we just got a glimpse of the future of education. Thank you so much for coming. I look forward to bringing you back.
It's always a great time to talk with you, so let's do it again.
We will. Thank you so much, Perry. Zach, if you could bring up the slides. I'm conscious of time, and I think you all recognize now that we could talk with Perry for hours. Let me just, before I let you go, say where we're heading over the next week. Next week, we change gears a bit. We're going to have Eddie Malone. Eddie is spearhead. He's at Georgetown University. He's an English prof there. He's the head of a really innovative center for teaching and learning, but that's not what we're talking about. Eddie is spearheading a project to reconceive of educational technology as an academic discipline. And what does this mean? Is this a good idea? What would it entail? What will the implications be? This is a brand new subject. It's just barely beginning to peep out. I'm looking forward to having Eddie so that you guys can see where that could go. Also, between now and next Thursday, you have the time to entertain yourself while thinking about the future. Our current near future science fiction read is Infomocracy, which is a fascinating, so far, look at a future where we take digital polling, digital data, and use it to reconceive the political structure of the human race. It's really engaging so far. I think you will get a treat out of it. So if you want, go to brianalexander.org/tag/infomocracy, and you'll get the first of a few posts about that. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about what we're doing, we have a whole series of links. You can go to ftte.us to learn more about the Future Trends Report, shindig.com to learn more about this great technology. And in the meantime, I'll stick around here for about 5 minutes if you want to chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for participating, and we'll see you next week.